So our next talk is going to be from Katie, who is the co-founder and chief of strategy of the decentralized clinical trials at the Scripps Institute, and is going to be talking to us about the potential for decentralized clinical trials to transform care, which I know has been a topic of kind of huge potential. From where I am from in Oxford, we had a number of big, interesting decentralization approaches in the pandemic, with the principal study was one. So it was a topic that I was very much around the discussion of, and to hear from Katie today is certainly something I've been looking forward to. So Katie, over to you. Thank you.
All right. Hello. Thank you, guys. Thanks for sticking around at the end of the conference. I know a lot of people have travel. And thanks to you sitting in the front. I used to teach undergrad, so I'm used to folks sitting in the back or sneaking in late, so no worries about that. My name is Katie Baca Motes. I have a dual role between Scripps Research and Care Evolution. I lead our joint venture, which is the Scripps Research Digital Trials Center. And today I want to talk a little bit about advances that we've seen in digital health technologies, as well as advances in decentralized clinical trials, coupled with what we've been talking about for the last 2 days, advances in machine learning and AI, and how that's really changing the way that we can conduct clinical research, and how ultimately we think it's going to change the way we deliver care. So I want to start with a little bit of a throwback. It's always fun to look back and remember. It was just about 10 years ago. This is my boss, Eric Topol, on the Colbert Show, where it was novel enough to be on a talk show, this idea that the smartphone, this communication device that we all had, was going to become this very powerful health tool. It was going to be able to collect all of these health data points on us and to be able to deliver healthcare in the future. Not everybody bought it at that time, but of course we've seen that happen and accelerate over the last 10 years. And it wasn't just advances in the smartphone. We've also seen tremendous advances when it comes to other digital health technologies. I don't know if you guys remember when Fitbit was just a fancy pedometer, or when the first smartphone came off, looking at, I think it was the Pebble Watch on Kickstarter. But now we've seen just a dramatic explosion of these devices that can tell us all sorts of things about our health individually, as well as at a population level. So if you're like me, where a Fitbit tells you when to stand up, how much activity you're getting, when to sleep, when you're getting stressed, what to do. My Oura Ring tells me, did my sleep last night align with my chronotype? It didn't, because I was traveling. It tells me exactly how much my resting heart rate is going up when I have an extra glass of wine. So it can shame me into better behavior. So we've seen this massive explosion, and it was during that advancement that I got introduced to digital health, and I've been there ever since. Back in 2016, I was lucky to be introduced to Dr. Eric Topol, Dr. Steinhubel, and came on to work at Scripps Research when they were partnering with J&J and Aetna on one of the very first direct-to-participant digital trials. And if I look back on this trial now, it seems like almost just comically simple, right? It was an e-consent. Patients would go to a website. We would deliver a device to them. But it was novel at the time. It was novel because it didn't include sites. It didn't have a lot of hand-holding. An elderly population at high risk of stroke was invited to use a Zeo patch to track AFib in the wild. And we were giving results back to those research participants. So it was really breaking ground on a new way of thinking, at least for us at Scripps Research, on the way that we can conduct clinical research. For those of you wondering why I went from Disney Research to Scripps Research, they had this all built out on the technical side, but what they didn't have is an understanding of how to motivate people outside of the doctor's office, outside of the clinic, to want to join clinical research, to be engaged with the process, and stay motivated to do data collection over time. During that same time period, we had another parallel effort happening within the United States. The then President Barack Obama had launched the Precision Medicine Initiative, which also had the Precision Medicine Initiative Cohort Program. It's a mouthful. It's now known as the All of Us Research Program. Scripps was one of the many collaborators across the country who was helping accelerate and define the All of Us Research Program. We had a few different roles in that program, but one of the major things that we were tasked with doing was to complement the traditional clinical study design. So much of the program was conducted in a way that we did traditional clinical research. So we had health provider organizations, academic medical centers, clinical sites, similar to what you see all over the world, and that really works. It helps to have a study coordinator walking you through something like an e-consent, drawing your blood, taking you through the entire process. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't enable the folks who are not easily accessible by those academic medical centers to contribute to biomedical research. So our task was to fulfill the promise of the All of Us Research Program, which was, we want to allow anyone, anywhere, living anywhere in the United States to raise their hand and both contribute to and benefit from biomedical research. So Scripps and then our technology partner, Carevolution, really needed to help, along with several other partners, create an ecosystem and an infrastructure that would allow for participants from rural Alaska to Guam to, where I'm from, rural New Mexico, complete the entire protocol. And that's from everything from blood draw, connecting their electronic health records, and the rest of the protocol. So we don't have enough time to go into all the blood, sweat, and tears and trials and tribulations of that, but I will just say the program's doing nicely. Just found out last week we actually surpassed these numbers, and we're over 700,000 participants involved in the program across the country. And notably, we have seen it really increase access, especially with underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities. We have over 50% of the population coming from these communities, as well as 80% coming from other traditionally underrepresented communities like rural populations, sexual gender minorities, and lower educational achievement. Once we had that infrastructure in place and we had learnings from programs like mSTOPS, from programs like the All of Us Research Program, we realized we could help and connect with people and organizations to help transform the way that we're doing clinical research, to make it faster, to make it more robust, and to make it more accessible. So this is just a snapshot of our programs here, and I'm going to deep dive into two real quick to showcase kind of what I'm talking about. So first I want to talk about DETECT. DETECT was our first official kind of Scripps DTC program. It was launched at the beginning of the pandemic. And we had very smart people at our group had just published, had a publication looking at Fitbit data at a population level. It was a large data set, looking at how we can track deviations from baseline resting heart rate, and then we can look at a population level, track that against CDC flu outbreaks, and you can actually use Fitbit data to predict where flu outbreaks were going to be. So when this new virus, this new illness came on shore, we decided, wow, can we do something like this with our new research infrastructure? Can we enable a research program that can see if this can be helpful with COVID? So we went from concept to launch in 4 weeks. Not going to lie, it wasn't a traditional work week. We worked a lot of nights and weekends to make that happen, but there was a lot of enthusiasm for this at the beginning of the pandemic so that we could really go from sitting at home hoarding toilet paper to really doing something that could make a meaningful difference. So we, along with our partners, launched this within our Carevolution My Data Helps app. And then with our partners, Walgreens, Fitbit, CVS, and others, we were able to enroll 35,000 people across the country in 4 months, and then continued to grow from there. Notably then, coming back and tying into AI and machine learning, our data science and AI team was able to publish the first algorithms being able to look at prediction of COVID just using wrist-worn wearables over the course of the next, or within 7 months of the initial launch of the study. And then we've had several other papers and several other collaborations in that thread since. So what this did to us as well is show us we can take this very lightweight baseline protocol and we can use it as a starting point, have 40,000 people engage with baseline data, and then we can tap into that database for additional targeted sub-studies and add on deeper data layers. So this was an example of one we did with our pharma partner. Now, we have these algorithms that can detect at an individual as well as a population level, but so what? What can that do for you at an individual level? Can we take this passively collected data, real-world data that we're collecting all the time on ourselves, can you pick something up, some deviation, and start to alert people? Does that lead to quicker diagnosis with an at-home test or a test at your local Walgreens or CVS? And then can we get you treated quicker? So we can stop the spread of the disease and also get you your individual treatment quicker. So those are the things that we worked on and subsequently on top of that platform. The next one is not a lightweight, easy, scalable program. It's more on the other side. So I want to talk about Progress, which is our most robust study to date. It is our deepest data capture that is fully remote, siteless, and without a lot of study coordination. This one, we just wrapped up enrollment last week on just over 1,000 individuals, really looking at trying to understand individual glycemic response, looking at a number of factors. So we look at HbA1c, we look at genomics, we look at microbiome, we look at nutritional intake, and we have CGM data as well. So I want to dive into a little bit about how do you design a study like this that is so robust in terms of data capture, but you have it all done by the participant in their home. Some of it was pretty easy for us because we had done it before. So saliva capture, we had done these things in the All of Us research program. The general public is used to things like this, at least some of them, that you spit in a tube, spit, 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 and then you send it in and you get your genomic information back. Other things, like at-home blood draws, were pretty scary for us and our participants. So we went through a number of testing of tap-activated phlebotomy devices. I think I scarred my children for life with showing them all sorts of blood draws and blood squirting everywhere. But we ended up looking at what is easy for a consumer to use in the home, taking into account things like finger strength and other things. And then we also took a look at it on the lab side, right? Can you get the blood out of the device? Can you analyze it? Can you get things like HbA1c out? Maybe since I'm running short on time, I will skip over the stool sample, but we've done a lot of work on how do we make this as delightful as possible to collect your stool for microbiome. We've tested things like traditional scoops and different wipes that are enabling this to be done. Now, we need to have a flexible platform to enable real-time notifications, reminders, different things. And I want to pause on this. I don't have it on the slide. But what was interesting in this study when we designed it, I was like, we have to have humans in the loop. This is so complex of a protocol. There's no way people are going to be able to do this just with an app. So we budgeted a bunch of study coordinators, and they weren't going to be in person, but they were going to be available on phone calls. We were going to have everybody schedule times to go over how do you put on your CGM, how do you take your blood, how do you do all of these things. But in parallel, we decided, well, why not build out, the modules within the application to tell people how to do these things. And it turns out when we had both of them live, overwhelmingly, people chose the self-guided path. And we have a pretty diverse patient sample, so it's not just tech-savvy young folks who can do this on their own. It's really across a spectrum of patients and participants. got to motivate people, I was able to put on my Disney hat one more time and develop motivation and incentive systems that would allow for people to stay motivated through those active study tasks, like tracking your food every single time you eat something. Something like that gets pretty boring after a while. I thought we're going to have to put a lot of monetary incentives, a lot of points behind these things. And we do think that worked. But what we're finding more and more, at least anecdotally, we're diving into the evidence, but it was really that personalized data visualization that was driving engagement over the course of the study. What they were able to do within the application was get real-time information back. So if I plugged in that I sat down for breakfast, ate my oatmeal and banana, they were able to go to the app and track their real-time glucose response to that, which participants found really engaging and insightful, and in some cases changed their behavior. So again, this one's just wrapping up enrollment, so we'll keep you posted on what factors contribute to glycemic response as the study teams go over that. But that brings us to 2023. So what do we see going on now that we've seen these advances? We've moved beyond kind of the foundational studies into the more robust studies that we're seeing in decentralized clinical trials. We do see this, increased ability for pharma industry to continue to go digital, continue to make more and more pieces digital, because as we all know in this room, developing new drugs are incredibly costly, and anything we can do to decrease the cost and increase the speed is an important endeavor. Not to mention the fact that we can create more diverse audiences and we can increase access to clinical trials so that the drugs that are developed can help us all. And I think industry is starting to take notice. There's this great paper out by AstraZeneca a couple of weeks ago. Thank you to anybody who's here from AstraZeneca for taking the time to both analyze and publish the ROI on different digital components for digital trials. You see here that they realized a reduction in number of site visits, not only improved the patient participant, but were able to decrease the times they had to come into the clinic by 43%, which then saved the trial $25 million. They were able to also do remote data collection on certain aspects for another trial and decrease the trial duration by 15%. And then they were able to realize that they can start to collect more and more of these things remotely, as we are seeing in our Scripps Research DTC trials, that you can pretty much collect everything, not everything, but 70, 75, 80% of things that you need to collect for a trial you can do remotely. So right now, what we see now is, what are we seeing transforming the way that we're doing research when it comes to decentralized clinical trials, and how can that inform what we're doing in the future? So we're taking a look across different initiatives and saying, okay, how do we start to collect multimodal data of the future? The last decade, it was, all of these wearable device data, and we're now going into blood and different biosamples. But what are the next things that we're able to collect over time longitudinally on our patient and participant populations? How can we utilize what we're seeing with the response from participants in clinical research? How can that inform the new tools that we're designing for remote patient monitoring, for the hospital at home, which is a growing trend? How do we start to validate these measures and really start to engage with people and understand which data are important to collect, how to do that in a passive way, passively as possible, and how do we do active data collection that is participant-driven as well, or patient-driven? We're seeing that some of the approaches that we're using in digital clinical trials can also help us compare virtual care delivery models to traditional in-person visits. So we're excited about all of these possibilities for the future of delivery of care. We're also focusing on partnering with individuals and organizations, rather, across the globe on both innovative studies like the Progress study, like Detect, like figuring out what things are working, but we're also partnering with organizations both on the industry side and the government side to help to build these flexible models that enable faster more robust data collection, and will accelerate the science and get us to answers faster. We're really hoping that we go away from industries where we're building bespoke models, bespoke apps for every single study, where somebody has to figure out if they should trust this app they're being asked to download for a remote digital study. And we're going away from having to build out different modules and different pieces for each of these elements. So we're really excited, like the stuff we build in our progress study when it comes to the workflows for blood draws or the way we're giving data back to our individuals or our participants at an individual level. We can take those modules, take our learnings, modify them if necessary, but then we can kind of plug and play into our other platforms in our other studies, like our ones in maternal health or sleep. So that's been a really exciting trend that we're seeing that is being adopted across the industry that I think is really going to accelerate the amount of research that is enabled over the next decade. So I'm getting flashing red lights, so that means it's time, I think, to open it up to the audience for a couple of minutes for any questions anybody has.
Katie, I think you're the first person who's paid any attention to the flashing red lights. It feels like the flashing red lights are quite flashing red lights. I'm impressed by the people who have the staying power to look at the flashing red lights and just carry on.
Just made me nervous
loads
a little bit.
A tidal wave of questions. So if it's all right, if everyone, when they ask the question, they don't mind just saying who they are, and then firing the question to Katie, I'm sure will be happy to answer.
Great, thanks. I'm Matt Arendt. I'm from FIND, which works on global health diagnostics. I'm really curious about one of your early slides talking about traditionally underrepresented populations in clinical trials, especially around digital. Mm-hmm. I was hoping you might speak to a few things you thought might have worked that didn't, and the opposite as well, which things in your strategy sort of included racial minorities, included those with advanced stage and other groups that you want to include but might be harder to capture.
Harder to reach. That's a great question, and there still needs to be a lot of work done on that. The things that we have found that have worked are, one, make the top of the funnel wide enough, right? That you're getting lots of people into the funnel in the first place. The other thing is really partnering with the communities we want to reach from the very beginning. That means from the study design. So our mantra is, if you're sitting around the table and you're saying, how do we reach these people or those people, you have the wrong people at the table. You have to design your research with the communities that you're trying to reach. So we have a wonderful patient advisory team that works on all of our studies, and then most of our studies, if not all, are led by, or at least partially led by, people of the communities that we're trying to reach. The other thing that works really well are community outreach. So there are some things that take a lot longer, but bring in populations that you would never otherwise have. So I'll give you an example with the DETECT program. We also launched DETECT, we launched it all over, but we had DETECT in Guam, but all of the outreach and everything looked very different. The process looked very different in Guam because what we were using in, the US or in Alaska or whatever was not going to work with the populations. So we have trusted partners in multiple areas, so both community partners and other academic partners in specific geographic locations. But it is something that isn't a solved thing. We don't have all the answers there, but there are learnings that we've been able to develop over the course of the studies. Thanks for the question. Yes?
Hi, my name is Rajesh Chavan. And I've worked in drug development. I understand the complexities in conducting multi-study arms across ethnicities. Mm-hmm. And of course, one of the challenges you already mentioned, and the challenge is also about digital endpoint harmonization, I suppose, when you address certain groups which are underrepresented. So the first question is, in what way can we, through study design, perhaps address the digital endpoint harmonization issues? For example, we could also target certain groups in different ways. Like there could be a special kind of a study. I'm just suggesting, but I
Okay.
wanted to know.
And what do you mean specifically by the digital endpoints and the measures and the harmonization? Because I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so
completely.
since we were unable, let's say, to collect data from certain underrepresented populations, then the harmonization of that data would need to be almost forced.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why. So can study design be used as one of those, strategic levers to address it upfront?
So I think there's a couple of things. So as we launch these big observational studies, not everybody's going to have the same data types, especially when we use bring your own device data, or we use specific devices that are not accessible to the entire population, or they are accessible to the right population, but because they haven't been tested on different skin tones or something, they're not as valid as we see in others. And so that is, again, an ongoing problem. I don't think it's solved, but I think there are some ways that you can do smart design to allow for that. Yeah. I wish I had all the answers in that, though. Yeah.
Katie, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well,
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.